Welcome to Roots of Resilience on the Front Lines of Climate Justice, a podcast by the Global Forest Coalition.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast commemorating the International Day of Action Against Big Biomass. I'm Jana Uemura, the Global Forest Coalition's climate campaigner and the coordinator of the Environmental Paper Network's Biomass Action Network's Latin American and Caribbean Working Group. I am based in São Paulo, Brazil, and this is a conversation, we'll be focusing on the Jequitinhonha Valley in the state of Minas Gerais. And in order to learn more about the ways in which vast expanses of eucalyptus plantations affect the area. These plantations are grown for the steel industry, which uses charcoal in its furnaces instead of fossil fuels like coal. It calls this green steel, but we will find out just how green it really is. Recently, one of Brazil's major steel producers, Aperam, has been selling carbon dioxide removal credits for producing what it calls biochar, which it says removes carbon from the atmosphere as the eucalyptus trees grow and then gets locked into soils when it's spread on plantation sites. Biochar is one of a number of land-based geoengineering techniques that are gaining more and more attention as the climate crisis deepens. These technological fixes are marketed as climate solutions, and in fact, Aperam is one of the top companies globally for selling this type of removal credit. But what's really happening on the ground? And what are the social and environmental impacts for local communities? And how does this connect growing debate on false solutions to the climate crisis? To help us unpack these questions, we are joined today by Karen Lang, who's in Brazil and recently visited communities in the Jequitinhonha Valley to learn more about how Aperam's eucalyptus plantations affect them and to assess whether biochar and charcoal production really are climate solutions. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. Could you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background and what drew you to this research?
Sure. Thank you, Jana, for inviting me and having me today. So my name is Karen. I have a background in political science, and I've worked for international networks of NGOs and social movements on campaigns to denounce the abuses of transnational corporations in different parts of the world. And so what has drawn me to this research is the contrast between what, on one hand, companies like Aperam call sustainable forests, and one of my passions in life, which is agroforestry. Even though companies like Aperam also call their supposedly sustainable eucalyptus plantations as sustainable forests, we know they're not. And the kind of agroforestry that I work with, it is about regenerating biodiverse forests based on the rules of the forest, using the forest's natural resources and cycles in order to, build an abundant forest with food and habitat and everything that forests provide for our planet. And so that's what drew me to this research.
Wow, Karen, that's wonderful. Actually, you got me really interested in the type of forestry that you do work with. And I would love to know more. But going back to our matters today, you already mentioned that this isn't really a sustainable issue. So, Karen, for listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly are charcoal and biochar in this context? And why is biochar being promoted as a climate solution?
Well, I think, Jana, that most people are familiar with charcoal, right? Which is made by taking wood and heating it at high temperatures in a low oxygen environment to dry it out so that it can be used as a source of energy for other purposes. And basically what I can gather from Aperam's documents, biochar is the same thing, or as Biofuel Watch would say, it's basically a fancy new name for charcoal. So they're basically produced in the same process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell me about it. They're basically produced in the same process, and biochar ends up being what they call fine chars, or like the dust and the small particles that are not often used in or are used less in the furnaces. And it's promoted as a climate solution because they claim that by incorporating biochar into soil, biochar has the capacity to capture carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the soil. And so they claim that it can actually remove, carbon from the atmosphere and store it. So it's a bit of a far-fetched claim, because if you take into consideration the entire life cycle of its production process, the whole eucalyptus plant, planting massive, large-scale eucalyptus monocultures and cultivating them every 5 years, and then with some, practices that may actually not store the carbon in the soil for a very long time. Plus, as I can tell you about a lot of the devastating impacts that these large-scale monocultures have on communities and on the region, which completely, show that the forests are not, or this kind of activity is not at all a solution to the climate crisis. On the contrary, it contributes to the climate crisis.
Yeah, well, from the little that you've explained so far, Karen, it sounds to me like it brings way more issues than it solves the climate crisis. And it even affects the communities, and it impacts the people living around the production of biochar. So could you walk us through the main findings of your time in Jequitinhonha Valley and what the main impacts were that you saw?
Sure. So I think one of the first things that impacted me on my way to Turmalina, which is the city where I stayed in, was the hundreds of endless kilometers of eucalyptus plantations. Now, I know we're doing a podcast, so people can't actually see that, but if you can imagine, it's almost like you're looking at an ocean of eucalyptus trees, and there's nothing in between them, right? Like, it's what they call green deserts here.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it's actually very repressive. It's very ominous. And when we got into Turmalina and started visiting the communities, we saw that it's basically making their traditional ways of life extremely difficult. I think one of the most striking impacts is, of course, on the water issues in the air in the region. The
How so?
communities, well, the communities would, that's one of the first things that they would mention when I would go to visit them. They would tell me stories about how the region was very abundant in water before the eucalyptus plantations were installed or imposed on the plateaus. The plateaus in this region have a particular configuration, is that they have several, what they call in Brazil, veredas, which are like either, I'm still looking for a good translation for this, but it's either swampy plains or wetlands. They're kind of, the people would even talk about how their kids would play in these areas and get, stuck in the mud, and they'd have to take bamboo and cut long pieces of bamboo to pull them out, because it's, people getting stuck in the mud. But basically, the veredas, are these wetlands, were very important for the water recharge or groundwater recharge in the area. So basically, one woman actually said it was really nice. She called the veredas on this one plateau, which people call chapadas in this region, as a river that's actually embedded in the plateau. And so these rivers are the source of water for the communities that live in the valleys below the chapadas.
Oh, that
And
sounds
so,
really beautiful.
yeah, I can only imagine what it would look like now. There's only one place that I went that the plateau was not occupied by the eucalyptus plantation, and the families that live below this plateau, they still have water year round. Whereas in the communities that I visited, many of them, most of their natural water springs have dried up. Many rely on the municipal water trucks for their water supply during the dry season, which is terrible, because there's issues about the quality of water that comes. The water is not treated in most cases, and so these people have to leave their communities and go into the city to request the water truck. And the water truck can take 2 weeks. It can take a month to come. So you can imagine what it would be like for people to have to constantly ration their water. So these are people that went from a situation where they had an abundance of water. They would say things like water would like just, there'd be a creek that would go by their house and they just go out and get water like right at almost at the doorstep. And now these people live in a situation where they don't even have enough water sometimes to water their gardens. So many of these people, they're traditional communities, so they farmed, they had their gardens, they had their crops, they had their animals, and now they're not even able to farm anymore. So that's one of the biggest impacts, I think, is the issue of the abundance that they used to have of water in the region. And now, actually the water problems, apparently they started like maybe 10, 15 years after the eucalyptus plantations were installed. And it just kept getting worse and kept getting worse and kept getting worse to the point where, they have to depend on water trucks, or some of them have, there's some communities, the communities have, cisterns that they can store some rainwater. And one of the more recent social technologies being that they're having access to with the support of an local organization called CAV, which is the Centro de Agricultura Alternativa Vico Neto. They have been working with dams, creating small dams for people to be able to have enough water to get through the dry season.
Oh, wow. This is so saddening to hear that place that was so abundant in water now has to rely on, many ways that are worse than the ones that they had before to get water.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the impacts. So water scarcity is one of the impacts, but there's also the fact that when Aperam, which at the time it was another it was a state-owned company called Asizita, which was privatized in 1992. When it took over the plateaus, these plateaus used to be the common lands that was occupied by the traditional communities. So if people would talk about they talk about the abundance in water, but they'd also talk about the fruit, the variety of fruit, because this region is in the Cerrado biome, and
Oh, yes. Cerrado has a huge biodiversity in terms of fruits.
exactly, it has a lot of biodiversity in fruits and different kind of animals, and contrary to what some people believe when they think of the Cerrado, people associate it with savanna, but that's not necessarily the case. One of the women, she said that the forest was so thick that you would only see the sky if you looked up in some places. So, they had this very rich biodiverse area with animals, with fruit, different kinds of fruit. People would say that when they would used to go out and get piqui, for example, which is one of the native fruits, they would leave at 4 a.m. They would go out. They wouldn't take water. They wouldn't take food because they'd get all of that on the plateau, and then they would come back home and process the piqui and etc. But that just kind of gives you an idea of like just how abundant the area was. And it also had people would fish, and they'd sell their fish in the market. They'd sell the piqui and the other kind of fruit, arachcum, murici, etc. They would sell that in the market. So, and they would use this common land as the area for they would leave their cattle to graze. So they had all this land. They had abundance of food. They were able to grow their own crops near their residences in the valleys. And then all of a sudden, with the support of a military government, this company comes in and basically takes away their land.
Oh,
on the
I was
plateaus.
wondering how they got like that. So this explains it. It was during the dictatorship in Brazil.
Yes, exactly. It was a policy by the military government to modernize the region, which it considered empty, which is, typical. This happened in a lot of parts of Brazil, right? The whole
it
issue
did.
of terra devoluta, which they call vacant lands, which were actually occupied by traditional communities, quilombola communities, or in the case of the region of the Chapada das Veredas, what they call grotero chapadeira communities, which are the communities that would use the common lands collectively on the plateaus and lived in the grotas, which is the valleys below. And so, from one day to the other, basically, this company comes in, it brings in the tractors, it brings in what we call in Brazil the correntões, which are big chains, massive chains that they hook up from one tractor to the other and just basically bulldoze everything in front of them, including animals and trees, et cetera, et cetera. It's a practice that is used until today in various parts of Brazil. Then they picked out the logs that were useful to the steel factories, because all of this was done to produce energy for the steel factories. And then they would set fire to the land, and of course, you know what that does to animals and people and etc. And then they would plant the eucalyptus plant. They installed these eucalyptus plantations. So yeah, if you put yourself in the community's place, they had they weren't rich people in financial terms, but they had a very rich life, a peaceful life. And the company comes in, takes over the land, and basically makes it impossible in a relatively short period of time for them to practice their traditional ways of life, which was much more sustainable than the current way of producing eucalyptus to produce charcoal, to produce green steel.
Oh, definitely. It sounds like actually a horrific image. I can't imagine the desperation or the suffering that these people have lived through, seeing their lands get to the state that they are today. And well, I feel so sorry about them. I can imagine during your research, you listen to lots of stories like this and regarding, well, water scarcity or the land changes, the loss of biodiversity. Um, do you think there are any stories that you would like to share with us?
Oh, there's lots of them, but we don't have time for many of them. But maybe I think people are sad about it. Like one of the women, I actually felt terrible. She started to cry during the interview because I asked about the future, and basically she was very sad about the fact that her children have never seen the stream where her and her sisters would play when they were young. She told the story about how they walk by this stream, which is completely dried up. And they say, well, Mom, what was this? What did this used to be? And she was like, oh my God, they don't even know that water used to run through here and that we used to play in it. And that's where we get our water from for drinking, for etc. And of course, you can imagine Janaína being a woman and, that this lack of water scarcity affects the women the most. And then so I think some of the stories
Yes, for sure.
really, some of the stories that it's quite shocking when you think about it, is the stories about how they would have to ration water. One woman said, the one woman told me that, she would have to go to like a community well and sit in line for 4 to 5 hours to wait for her turn to wash the clothes. So they'd be sitting there. Can you imagine, like, having to go somewhere, take all your clothes, wait in line for 4 to 5 hours because there's so many other people washing clothes, but also because they had to wait for the well to fill up again. And then you have to, take all the clothes back home. So, it's those seem like details about various, details about daily life, but that has it's a very stressful situation for whoever is living in it. And, it's completely so different from most of us, most of us that live in the cities and whatnot, that we don't see the water problems coming as well as, as they are experiencing it firsthand.
Yes,
It's
it
very
makes it
difficult.
harder. It makes everything harder. I can only imagine. I mean, these people having to go through the grief of losing their rivers, their plantations, their forests, and still on top of it, having to deal with so many practical daily life issues that make everything much harder. Um, I've heard many stories too, and not even having gone there, I know that it makes it harder. For example, the water scarcity for girls to go to school. Sometimes you have no water at school, and people have to make this choice, as you mentioned. Well, should I go? Will there be water for food? Will there be water to wash clothes? And I can only imagine it. And I can also imagine this brings a lot of health issues as well, or at least many concerns regarding health. So, as you were talking to the people in the communities, did they mention any concerns about health issues or anything of the sort?
Yes, they did, actually. It actually came up in interviews, not only with the communities, but also people in the city. There is a rise of the incidence of cancer in the region, a very high incidence of cancer in the region. And it's affecting not only, older people, it's affecting young people. There's, stories of young people that have got cancer and died very quickly. And people, they don't have the studies to prove it, but most people associate this rise in cancer with the amount of chemicals that the company uses on its plantations. Because the plantations are up in a higher area, right? And the water drains down. So there's concerns with contamination of water sources. There were concerns about a very high incidence of cancer in the region. That apparently there's more and more cancer cases, and they're affecting not only people of a certain age, elderly people or whatever. They're also affecting young people, children, adolescents, and some cases of people that have caught cancer and have died very quickly. So unfortunately, they don't. I mean, there's no studies to prove what is causing this cancer, but most people associate it with the amount of chemicals that the company is using on its plantations. The the Aperam declares in its reports to FSC for its certification of its forests and et cetera, that it uses glyphosate, Roundup, and a ant bait, which is I can't pronounce, so I'm not even going to try. But it's a kind of chemical for ants, and they use several other chemicals as well. But of course, under the certification system, it's allowed. But so they're applying this on the plateaus. Like I said, Roundup, this other ant bait, and a series of other chemicals.
It must be really desperating to look at the situation and the perspective, and to think about the future.
There's the health issues, but there's the issues of water. As the planet, the temperature rises on the planet, the fears of water scarcity also grow. And this is in general. It's not just regarding where there's massive eucalyptus plantations, but there also are concerns by various people in the region, not just communities, but also public officials that I spoke with, etc., concerns of desertification. And so what kind of future will that bring for the area? And one of the public officials said to me, and it was very very sad. I actually just turned to him and I said, well, aren't you kind of worried about the situation? And he said, well, yeah, the fears of the desertification. And he said, well, basically the company can pick up and move to somewhere else. We can't. The people here can't. So when he said that, that was very striking. And the same concerns about, a future of desertification, or even just the possibility of being able to stay on their land and continue to, have a glimpse of the kind of life that they used to have and some kind of future for their children. It is a concern for many people in the communities.
So, do you think there are any local initiatives or any responses from the community that are trying to resist these impacts? And did you find any ways in which people are resisting the impacts or proposing different ways to care for the land? and especially if there are women, examples from what women are doing in the region.
Well, there are the people from the Valley de Jequitinhonha, and especially the communities, even in face of all these difficulties that they have, they're very, I'm looking for the right word, they're very resilient. They're very, they're fighters. They're, they even though that they face all these difficulties, they do want to fight for their land. They do want to continue to stay on the land and to pursue their way of life. So one of the things that there's different scales of and kinds of resistance, right? So for one hand, on one thing is, like I mentioned, there's the organization CAV, C-A-V. They have been helping communities with different kind of water management and water catchment kind of technologies. So, harvesting rainwater, building swales, building dams, things like that, to try to help the communities, try to alleviate the water issues that they experience, knowing that it's not the solution to the problem, but at least trying to allow people to have water to be able to continue living in the communities. CAV also supports the communities with technical support, like along the lines of agroecological practices and values, etc. So they help the farmers with their organic, obtaining certification. For those who are still able to produce food or agricultural products, they can get certification for their products. They support local markets. People continue to try to produce for local markets. The women, for example, there's a women's association in the community of Gentil who have recently received funding for alternative sources of income, because one of the issues with Aperam is the arrival of the company in the region is that the lack of options for income, right? So people have lost the income from farming. Aperam itself is not a major employer in the region. Many people confirm to me that there's other smaller landowners that offer more employment opportunities than the company. And actually, there are very few people, like when I did the interviews, I asked if there was anybody that worked for the company. There would be one or two people from the community that actually work for the company. So people are looking for other alternatives to make ends meet, right? And so the women from the community in Gentil, they have recently received funding to buy sewing machines to try to offer youth an option for income option, right? But one of the most maybe successful cases or forms of resistance, I guess, is actually the women that make the ceramists, or the pottery makers. Now, this is a very interesting story because there's women mostly from the communities of Campo Buriti and Campo Alegre have become famous for their pottery work. It is absolutely beautiful. It is hand painted. They use natural paints. They're different plates and different kind of bottles and just a whole range of pottery that crafts that they make with out of clay. They depict the animals and the things from their daily life, right? And their pottery started actually as a tradition, right? It was some even say that this tradition dates back to indigenous people in the region. But the women would make pottery, like their plates, their bowls, the pots for cooking, all that stuff was all made out of pottery. And they would, while their husbands are away for 8 months of the year, they would, working in Sao Paulo or in other parts of the country, cutting down sugarcane, the women, to try to make ends meet, they would sell the pottery, take it to the market and sell it. And they realized that people were becoming more and more interested in the pottery that they were bringing to the markets. So they eventually formed their own association, and then the pottery continued to the sales increased, etc. And they were actually the people I talked to was mostly, the women I talked to were mostly from Burichi, and they received a donation of a galpon, a place where they could store their pottery, and it's gotten to the point where now their pottery has become so popular that these women make a living from this. So it's this, it's a tradition that's passed on from one generation to the next that has actually turned into a source of financial independence for the women in the community. It's an option for women to stay in the community, because one of the women, she told me that the women used to have to leave and go to the big cities where they'd have to work as domestic workers. And now they don't need to do that anymore. They're actually able to stay in the community and make a living off their pottery. It was, refreshing to hear the story of how women, after such a difficult life, women having to take care of their entire families, take care of their farms and sustain themselves while their husbands were gone working in other parts of the country. Their art has become a source of income that now has given them financial independence, and has even allowed them to, send their kids to university. They create jobs for other women or other people in the community to help paint their pieces, help with other odd jobs around the house, things like that. So the people from the communities in the region of Turmalina, Chapada das Veredas, they have they have a innate strength that has, I think, helped them to get through all of this difficulties, all these difficult times, and I do feel a real sense of community in that region.
Oh, wow, that's so amazing, Karen. These are so inspiring stories. I mean, through all their difficulties and the issues they've been facing, they found ways to express themselves through art and be able to live their lives from it. So do you think there are any other anything else that you would like to share from your research that you think it would be really important? And we are also commemorating the International Day of Action Against Big Biomass. And do you think there's a message you found from the communities that you would like to share with everyone who's listening to this podcast?
I think the key message would be for support for the communities. What is clear to the communities that the solution to their problems is they want their land back. They need their land back. It came out very clearly in the interviews and in conversations that they have a very clear understanding of the function of what they call the veredas, which is the wetlands or the swampy plains that are up on the plateaus, in terms of the recharge area for groundwater sources and for their rivers and streams and natural springs that they used to have in their land. And of course, when you have the water back, you give hope to the community about being able to get return to the traditional ways of life. So people want, at least to have the veredas back, the land around the veredas back, so that they can reforest it, they can remove the eucalyptus, they can reforest it with native forest, and this will help to bring back the water sources and, like I said, recuperate their way of life. This is very clear to them. They have actually visited other communities that have done this, that have managed to get back part of their land. They're able to reforest the area around the veredas or other water sources, and the water cycle is reestablished. Water does come back, as does the native flora. So it's clear. They know what they want. They know what they need. They know what the true long-term solution to the problem is. Because all these other, the different projects that the company offers, or even some of these solutions to provide some temporary relief to the people, it's not the final solution. So they want their land back. And one of the very important steps in reclaiming their ancestral lands is gaining official recognition as traditional communities. In the state of Minas Gerais, there was a law passed in 2014, which was later regulated by an executive order in 2017, that enables communities that identify themselves as having a different way of life, a traditional way of life that has been they have practiced for years and have traditions that are passed down from one generation to the next, and that rely on natural resources for their sustenance or for maintaining these traditions, that they can declare themselves as traditional communities. And in the case of the communities in the Chapada das Veredas, which is the region that I visited, there's the option of quilombola communities, which are usually the descendants of African slaves, and the option of grotero chapadeira, which is the communities that had this traditional relationship where they would use both the chapada or the plateaus for, like I said before, land grazing, collecting fruit, fish, you name it, medicinal plants, wood, etc. They got all from the chapada, and they lived down in the groteiras, which is where they had their houses and their gardens and their crops. And so the communities are mobilizing to obtain this official status to have a more solid or a stronger basis for their claims for the land. So I think that what they would want, like I said, one of the things that the communities would like is for people to hear their story, people know what's going on and what's happening to them, to pressure the company, pressure the governments, etc., and show the world that this is not the true solution to the climate crisis, and to support their attempts to reclaim their ancestral lands. The other key message that especially a few women provided was, to keep on fighting. One of the women says, if we don't fight, nothing will change. Nobody will do it for us. So we need to keep on fighting. And another woman said that the importance of bringing the struggles together, uniting forces, because she said we have to stop thinking that we're small. We have to realize that we're big. When we unite forces and fight for real change, we're giants.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Such a lovely message to share. I do believe from the stories that you told, Karen, that they will keep fighting, and I really do hope that they manage to get their lands back, to work together, to stay strong, and to recuperate their lands. I think that would be a beautiful thing to see, as opposed to the first images we've talked about of losing lands.
I think we need to think about models. I think we need to think about, this was the experience in the Valley of Jequitinhonha dates back to the military regime. So it was imposed by force. And it was based on a developmentalist mentality, which is something that is still very dominant here in Brazil. And this developmentalist mentality does not take into consideration neither the rights of traditional communities nor the environment, what this does on the environment. And we know that we've gotten to the point on this planet that, it's basically humanity running full force towards a wall. And the solutions that the companies that are offering, they're so-called sustainable forests, and they're carbon credits and things like this that basically are just a smokescreen to maintain the status quo, to keep things going exactly as they are. So I think when we're fighting for real change and to really try to, save the planet to a certain extent from a climate crisis, the climate will save itself by itself. It doesn't need us for that. But if we want real change, if we want a better future and to be able to live happily in this beautiful planet that we are lucky to live in, we need a model change. We don't need band-aid solutions. We don't need temporary solutions. We need to dismantle corporate power. We need to rein in corporate power, and we need to recognize the importance of forests and traditional ways of life, and like more sustainable ways of life. And my fear is that COP30 is about opening up Amazon to exploitation. And quite frankly, we won't survive without the Amazon.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for adding this. I think that especially when we're talking about the subject of false solutions, we always need to remind ourselves of what the real drivers of climate change are and what are the real solutions to this. So
I think, Jana, that it's important for us for the world to recognize the value and the importance of real forests. When I say real forests, I'm referring to native forests. I'm referring to forests that are biodiverse, that are allowed to grow naturally or help to grow naturally, as in the case of the agroforestry systems that I work with. We don't need the world. What the last thing that the world needs is more plantations. We do not need more monocultures, tree monocultures occupying vast areas of arable land, sucking up all the resources, both in the land and the water. And so the real solution is not investing in subsidies or support for research on what the impacts of biochar can be or what are the benefits from biochar, etc. We need to be investing in people, in farmers, small farmers, to be able to preserve what forest is left, but also to plant forests. And I mean diverse forests. And I mean not reforestation projects where you're planting one tree every 4 meters and using Roundup at the basis to stop the grasses from taking over. We need people that are working and being paid to care for the trees and to ensure that they're able to get into the adult phase and produce abundance of food and habitat and shade and water for everybody. That's what the planet needs, not monocultures, not tree monocultures, and not biochar, nor carbon credits.
thank you, Karen. I think it was really important that you mentioned it. So thank you so much, Karen, for sharing all of your powerful insights and so many stories from Valley of Jequitinhonha. Thank you for helping us understand what's happening behind the label of green energy and carbon dioxide removal.
Well, thank you, Jana, for inviting me to participate in this podcast and giving me the opportunity to tell the people of the Valley de Jequitinhonha's story. And I really wish Global Forest Coalition and the Biomass Action Network and all the partner organizations and communities and peoples that you work with across the globe a lot of success and strength to continue the fight.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing these powerful insights and for helping us understand what's happening behind the label of green energy and carbon dioxide removal. This podcast has been produced by the Global Forest Coalition in collaboration with the Biomass Action Network, part of the Environmental Paper Network, the Hands of Mother Earth, Home Alliance, and Biofuel Watch. To learn more about the work we're doing on biomass energy and land-based geoengineering, follow the links in the description that accompanies this podcast and find us on various social media platforms. Get involved in the International Day of Action Against Big Biomass through the Biomass Action Network's website and by following the Big Bad Biomass hashtag online. Thank you so much for listening, and until the next one.